Now we are polling your opinion. On electoral politics, you can choose between empowering political parties through proportional representation, or, if you are ready for it, you can empower your individual right to initiative, recall, and referendum. In other words, direct democracy.
At the same time, speaking again about electoral politics, I know there's quite a number of people who are dissatisfied with where the NDP is going, wondering, well, isn't there a way to either push or pull this party towards the left? And so my question for Jean and Mabel, maybe this time starting with Jean, is, do we need a strong communist party again to get the NDP to where the CCF has been in the past?
I guess that I have little faith that just having another party will necessarily pull our electoral politics collectively to the left. I think I was having a conversation around at lunch around the fact that I think our electoral system is fundamentally flawed. And you can interject another party into the mix, but I don't necessarily think it's going to necessarily reshape the conversation, the dialogue that's happening on a national level. I think what we need is electoral change that sees our elected officials more representative of the votes that are happening. And of course, I'm talking about proportional representation. And I think we really need that strong pressure from the progressive movement out there to work with parties, with the trade union movement, the labor movement, to make sure that those progressive agenda items stay on the agenda. It's too easy for them to get pushed off right now.
Okay, thanks very much. A slightly modified question for Mabel in this respect. Where, if like Jean suggests, we need electoral reform, where does proportional representation come from?
So the big picture, I think, Ingo, and the challenge in terms of how do we bring progressive politics forward and how do we make gains politically is, number one, we need the progressive movements, and I would say together electorally and also social movements need to successfully frame our vision for the world and our goal, that we advocate for the collective, for society, and that the needs of people are the priority, and that is how we should, that our policies should follow those priorities. So I think that's a need that needs to happen, and a discussion around what is a progressive economy, why should the economy work for people, and why should people, basically comes down to people above profits, that should be the priority in our world, and that we should consider that in terms of the work we do in government. And I think that needs to come from both electorally and also social movements.
What I want to talk about is how in California, what we're trying to do with what the CFT in this tax education program is doing is help return democracy to the state. Because we don't, beyond the fact that economics helps to determine how much of a democracy you have, especially for the majority of the people, just at the sheer level of political democracy, we don't have one in California right now. And that's because California is alone among every state in the nation in needing to have in its legislature 2/3 of the legislature in order to pass either a tax or a state budget each year. It takes a simple majority to eliminate a tax. It takes 2/3 to raise a tax. What this means is that every year for the last 15 years, in order to get a state budget, the Democrats have given up one or more taxes that used to be in place, including major taxes for corporations and for the rich. We now have somewhere between $14 and $16 billion a year in taxes that are gone. If you want to know where the big California state budget deficit that we're operating under every single year comes from, it's that. We've given up a tax each year for the last 15 years. I want to close this part by just talking about a poll that was taken about 5 or 6 years ago by a national news magazine. They asked in this poll, a national poll, If you knew that the money that came from a tax on the rich would go for sure to public education, public health, and public safety, would you vote for a tax on the top 1% at the top of the economic pyramid? So, to their credit, roughly 60% of the people polled said, yes, that'd be a good idea. 20% said, no, they're opposed to all taxes. The other 20% who said no did so, they found this out with a follow-up question, because they thought they were in the top 1%. So that's the kind of level of education that we need to do. People don't know where they are in the economic pyramid. Many people don't have any idea that 1% of the population owns 34% of the wealth. It's a very basic job of education that we have to do of the voting populace in California.
Jim, would you join us to tax the rich like hell?
Yes. So moved. Is there a seconder?
Seconded.
I think this question of taxes is one that we lost the debate on as the left, and that we lost it over a decade and a half, and everybody got so shy about talking about taxes, even our own party wouldn't talk about it, and the labor movement didn't have a lot to say about it either, frankly. This has to change. And it has to change because we can't make the world we want if we keep going down the road we're going. There's this much we create in this province. That's the GDP. You can talk about it at the world level, the provincial, national, local. This is how much we create this much wealth. And there's one important political question that talks about everything else, and that's where do you draw the line? And the line is between what we spend on ourselves and what we spend on each other. And where you put that line determines a great deal about the kind of society you live in. And what we've been witnessing in British Columbia, if you go back 20 years, is we've been watching that line shrink. So in 1980, even right to the end of the 90s almost, we were spending between 20 and 19% of our GDP on each other. So that paid for schools, hospitals, all that other stuff, environmental protection, everything else. And we watched that go down, okay? So the line started to squeeze. So the money we got to spend ourselves went up. Now, not the working class by any means, it's the people at the top got this. So it's now down at 15.6% of the GDP is what we spend on what we need for each other. We spend on each other. One is, what do we do about the public sector and how do we pay for it? Because no longer good enough for the left to stand up and say, I want a child care program, I want a pharmacare program, I want seniors to have housing, I want this, I want that. You have to discuss how we pay for it and who should pay for it. So our paper looks at that. If you look at the tax cuts from this government, it's about $3 billion a year in tax cuts between 2001 and 2008. 1.5 billion of that tax cuts went directly to corporations, directly. In 2011, we'll spend more money, we'll collect more money from students for tuition than we'll collect from the corporate sector. That's how skewed it is, and small business will pay no taxes by 2011. The final thing, we did a poll in Gordon Campbell's writing, where the average income is probably $65,000 or $70,000 a year compared to the provincial average of 40. We asked them about the HST and all those questions. I won't go into the details, but we did ask them, would you support tax increases to pay for schools, hospitals, and homelessness? And I thought, if we get 50%, that would be a good sign for us we're going in the right direction. But we got 75% of people that say they take tax increases themselves. I'm not talking about, and they're well-off people, most of them. They take a tax increase if they want to make the society work better. So it's a lie that people are opposed to paying taxes and that they don't think it should be fair.
Now we are polling on labor wages, Canada's intervention in Afghanistan, the Ministry of Indian Affairs. Remember, your opinion is the essence of direct democracy.
Join the union while you may.